All right. Well, my name is Darius Sharp. I'm an ER nurse and health enthusiast. I'm here with Mark Kaplan, who was a professional tennis player back in the 80s. Is that correct, Mark?
Yep, it was about 89 to 95 actually, so early 90s.
And despite being a professional athlete, Mark ended up having a cardiac event at a pretty young age, actually. What was your age when that happened?
At 52.
52. Okay. Wow. All right. So let's start from the beginning. Tell me about a little bit about your tennis career.
Okay, so I'm my accent's from South Africa. I was born in Johannesburg, and three of us, myself, my older brother, my younger sister, we were all, kind of athletic kids growing up in Johannesburg, and I grew up playing tennis. There was tennis, golf, weather's really good, and came from a tennis family. Played as a young kid, became a good junior, made junior Wimbledon and became a top three in the country tennis player, and that's how we kind of grew up. And from there, I went to college. I got a tennis scholarship in California. I walked on the tennis team and became a top five college Division 1 player in the US, and had a good career, and then went straight on the tennis tour, ATP tour. It was kind of a natural progression for me to see how I could make it, on the big leagues, Wimbledon, US Open, all those Grand Slams. And but yeah, that's where I came from, and that's I still play tennis today. It's a great sport, and I'm grateful that I came through this whole journey actually being as fit as I am, and my weight is the same as I was in college. So I'm still back at 172 pounds. So pretty
Oh,
happy with
wow.
that.
And how
Mhm.
tall are you?
I'm 6 foot 1.5.
Okay, yeah, so that's what BMI of like 22, something like that.
Yeah,
Pretty
about
good.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, about that.
Um, so did you play any of those big tennis tournaments? I don't follow tennis. I know Wimbledon, right? And I
Yep.
guess what
No,
the
I
US
played
Open
them
is the other
all.
one?
Yeah, I played Wimbledon. I played the Australian Open, French Open. I had a couple of very good wins. I beat Patrick Raft, who was number one in the world. He won a couple of US Opens. I beat like four top 10 players in the world, and I
Wow.
fulfilled my dream. I played, all the Grand Slams that I watched on TV when I was a young kid watching John McEnroe, and I did it for about 5 years, and then
Well,
then
that's wonderful.
yeah.
Man, wow, that's super cool. So after finishing, your career as a tennis player, what did you do after that? Because a lot of people, I know a lot of professional athletes kind of stumble and fumble around after they've accomplished their dream and they're still relatively young.
Yeah, it's a good question. I was 27 when I decided to take a different path. And, I got to about 100 117 in the world. And, I had ambitions to be even top 10, but it's a hard life. And I decided at that point that I wanted to kind of move on into business. And I went, decided to get my MBA back at UC Irvine and get into the finance side. And I didn't really want to be a journeyman and stay on the tour and, be teaching tennis at like 35. I made a decision to, my father was in investments and finance, and I decided to, use my brain and go back to school. So I went back to business school. I did that over 2.5 years, a MBA degree, and then I joined my father in a startup. We basically, started up an insurance company, and then I've been ever since in investments, capital raising for the last 25 years. So I pivoted. You're right. Not many tennis players do that. They either stay in tennis or find something in the marketing side for sports. But I decided to go into finance, and happy I did that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the obviously the financial prospects of that are probably a little better.
Yeah, it's not easy
Um,
playing tennis for a living. I mean, it's glamorous and you travel the world. But the first year was amazing. I went to all these incredible places, and then but after year, you're living out of your suitcase, traveling the world and, going to Asia for 7 weeks in Europe. And, it's lonely. You're not traveling on a private jet. You're not making millions of dollars when you're 150 in the world. So
yeah,
it's
yeah. So
something
it's
that I
just
dreamed of.
constant.
Yeah. And I dreamed of it, and I was done with that part of my life. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally understandable.
Mhm.
So as you transition into essentially what I guess was an office job and you're not working out as much and you're not playing tennis as much, obviously. How did your health do over those years after you started working in the financial industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. I never realized at the time, but my weight actually started to increase, and I got married. I got married in 1999, so it was about 3 years after I finished my business school. And you're right, I wasn't as active, I still played once in a while. I still consider myself relatively healthy, but I did put on weight. I went from like 172 to like 195, and it was very stressful. I traveled a lot. It wasn't really an office job. I was in sales and marketing, and we traveled around the world, to all over from to Middle East, Asia, LATAM, and so I spent a lot of time on planes, not eating the greatest food. But I still thought of myself as an athlete. I worked out, went to the gym, in the hotels, I did the sauna, but my weight was increasing. And you can see me in pictures from the past, I did put on weight. And so, it's kind of, you think you're safe and you think you're okay. And then slowly things kind of add up. And that's what happened to me.
So you got to you say 195 was your biggest?
195, yeah.
And you're 6'3"?
No, I'm 6'1.5".
6'1.5". Okay. So,
Yeah.
like, just for reference for people, if you're 6'1" and 195, that actually puts you at a BMI of 25.7. So it like really just
Yeah.
crosses the threshold of being into the overweight category. So we're not talking about very big. You were not fat.
Yeah, I
Nobody
know.
in our
Exactly.
culture would look at you and think you were fat.
No, I didn't think I was fat, and in America, I was one of the skinny ones. I thought, so it's another problem. I thought I was relatively healthy, looking
Mhm.
around. So yeah,
So in the years after that, you were working, you're married, raising kids, weight has creeped up a little bit. How did you feel overall? It sounds like you thought you were pretty active, you were still, exercising some, still playing tennis a little bit. Didn't feel like you were particularly ill or anything?
I actually had some warning signs, I started the job in 2000 in this career of finance and sales and traveling, and in 2008 I had like a period where I wasn't actually feeling that well. I had a bout of candida actually, which is a gut issue. I didn't realize. I woke up one night and I was sweating and I wasn't feeling good, and I went to a naturopath, and they said, "Look, you got some gut issue," and I think it was because I took a lot of antibiotics in my younger age. I had bronchitis. I caught bronchitis a lot, so I was given antibiotics. And anyway, they said once they did the whole analysis on me that I had like an overrun of bad, gut whatever microbiome. So I went on this whole program of like detoxing mercury. I had a high mercury level. So I went
Oh,
in a
really?
deep dive in my health actually in 2008, where I wasn't feeling well. And it took me about 2.5 years. I had to kind of fix up my thyroid. My thyroid was a bit low. I said mercury detox. I had to fix up my biome, which is a whole diet that I had to be on, like a caveman diet, eating no carbs at all. So I did have a warning sign around 2008, and then that was it. I got right on that, and just continued. But my diet never changed. I didn't really change my diet that much, which was more carbohydrates, frankly. I mean, carbohydrates for me was the safe thing to eat because meat was, as an athlete, I was carbo loading, frankly, for energy. I was having a lot of pasta, bread, you know, a lot of things that I thought were healthy and were fuel for me. Um, and that did add to my candida because they did say it was fueling the yeast and that whole kind of overgrowth in my gut. But I never kind of tied the two together for heart health or any other health. Um,
Mhm.
so I just continued to eat like I was eating.
Okay, so at that point, what was it, 2008 when you kind of were having these symptoms and then you went on this protocol. It sounds like it was a brief protocol where you cut carbs out and
Yeah.
try to correct your microbiome and your gut health. And
Yes.
then you kind of just went right back to how you typically been eating. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yep.
Okay.
Nothing changed.
Okay. So did you I'd say actually after that period, did you feel like you got some relief of the symptoms that you had been previously having?
Yeah, I did get some relief from the candida symptoms that I was having, which is the night sweats and just not feeling good. I mean, pretty like low energy, and so I did improve because I went on this like very strict diet. But then I actually had a bout of it again. Like I think like 4 or 5 years later, I had to go back and do it again. So it wasn't totally gone. Um, and so it was kind of frustrating because I wasn't sure why I was getting it. I thought I'd fixed my biome, I had all the probiotics, and I was doing all that, but it came back again, and I had to go back on that protocol. So
Okay.
and my weight, my weight had gone up again. And my weight always kind of fluctuated. It was going up, and I couldn't really take the weight off. And I didn't really add up what was going on, like having more protein and less carbs. And I just never understood that whole thing. And I was a little bit naive to what I was eating.
Okay.
Mhm.
So you had the candida problem, and candida for a lot of people don't know, it's actually a fungal infection.
Mhm.
So did they diagnose you with what people call SIFO, or small intestine fungal overgrowth?
Yeah, yeah. Basically, that was it. I mean, yeah. And I had literally starved the bad bacteria. They fed me all these antifungals, and I had so many vitamins I was taking to like kill the bad bacteria, and
Wow,
and then you basically replace it with good bacteria, probiotics, and all these other things. And yeah. Hmm.
got it. So it got better for a while. You went back to
Yeah.
your old way of eating. Symptoms came back again.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and so fast forward from there. You said that was initially 2008. 4 or 5 years later, symptoms come back. You do the
Yeah.
same thing over again. And then go ahead and just take us forward to the time that you actually had a cardiac event, and what led up to that, and what year was that?
Yeah, that was 2020 actually, which was like right about COVID. Actually, my father had just passed away that year. It was in February, and um, I also had a lot of stress. I mean, I think I was involved with like three or four startups. So we built a very successful insurance company. Then we did another company. So there's a lot of stress involved, I think, as well. But leading up to 2020. Yeah, my father had passed away, and we were, obviously COVID, it was more indoors and whatever. And I was playing tennis. Actually went to Lake George with my kids, and we had a great time over there. And I came back, and someone said, "Hey, Mark, I would like to play some tennis with you." A good friend of mine in Darien in Connecticut, and I said, "Fine." So I just went, walked on the tennis court and for a singles game for an hour on clay. Didn't have much of a warm up, which is probably not that good, and we just started, playing. We started playing singles and, running around, and it was a normal day. It wasn't that hot. And at one point I kind of lost my breath. I was out there thinking, wow, is it smoggy out here? I was having trouble breathing to actually get my full like oxygen when you're breathing and running. And I was like, something is wrong here. And I kind of stopped playing, and I said, look, I got to sit down. I don't feel that well, which I didn't know what that meant. But I sat down and still didn't feel that good. I was not really breathing well, and I decided to go back home. So I drove home, picked my daughter up at soccer. I dropped her off, and I realized something wasn't right, and I just basically drove to the ER, and they put all these things on my chest, and they said something has happened, something on the ER where they picked up on my EKG or whatever, and they said, look, you need to go to the hospital, Stanford Hospital, which I was just in a small ER area called the Tully Center, and I just drove myself there with a piece of paper, and I basically
Really?
I basically walked into this hospital and I said, "Yep, I just was at the Tully Center ER, and they sent me over here." And they're like, quickly they brought me in there, and they did the whole thing, put thing in my arm and this and that, and then they noticed my troponin was a little bit high. It wasn't that high. I mean, it was like 7, and they said, "Look, we need to keep you overnight because we're not sure what happened." Anyway, I stayed overnight in the hospital. And the next morning, they went through the ultrasound and all that stuff, and they said, "Look, we're gonna need to put you in a cath lab because something did happen. There was some, seems like this, some event did occur." And anyway, they went through my wrist catheter, and they basically put a stent in my diagonal, in my off my left artery, my main one, and that was like a shock, right? So I came out of there in the hospital, and it was like a whirlwind, right? It was like 2 days, and the cardiologist came and saw me and said, "Yep, you had an event, and don't worry, it's genetic, and you need to take these drugs." He gave me a little bag of drugs, some statins and aspirin and some beta blocker, and I was just like, okay.
So I wanted to take a moment to pause here and describe exactly what happened. So Mark went to emergency department that didn't have many resources. Some states have these standalone ERs that don't actually have a hospital connected to them or cardiologists on duty. So when he went in there, they did an EKG tracing looking at the electrical activity of his heart, and they saw some changes that were concerning, but not concerning enough to call an ambulance, say, and have him transferred. So there's one big thing that we're looking for when we do an EKG on a patient who is having chest pain. We look for what's called ST segment elevation. And that means that a patient is actually having a full blockage of an artery and there is death of cardiac tissue happening right at that moment. So if we see that, we call that a STEMI, ST segment elevation myocardial infarction. And we send that patient directly to the cath lab. Do not pass go. Do not click $200. You are shipped off immediately. So with Mark, he had something a little bit different. They saw changes on the EKG. They knew he needed to get a more detailed workup. So they went ahead and handed him the EKG and said, "Hey, go ahead and drive to the hospital that you need to go to." I don't know if we would do that in my state or at my hospital, but that's what they do over there. So they likely saw what's called ST segment depression or maybe T wave inversion. Again, I don't have his EKG, so I don't. I'm just speculating here. And ST depression or T wave inversion mean that there's some ischemia happening. It means the heart's not quite getting as much oxygen as it would like, but there's not a full infarction. There's not death of cardiac tissue. They need to get worked up. They need to ultimately go to the cath lab, but it's not emergent. So when they get to the next ER, they draw troponin on him. That's a cardiac enzyme that shows if there is some stress happening to the heart. They'll do what's called serial troponins, where they check them every 2 to 3 hours and see if that number is going up. If it's going up, he's definitely having an NSTEMI or non-ST elevated uh, myocardial infarction. And most likely they put him on heparin, which will thin the blood. It'll prevent the clot from getting any bigger, but it won't necessarily resolve the clot. So the next morning, um, he describes going into the cardiac cath lab where they do an angiogram on him. And lo and behold, they did see a blockage of his left diagonal, one of the diagonal arteries coming off his left anterior descending. So they go ahead and put a stent in to open that up and, like you said, give him a bag of pills and send him on his way.
It's like I was confused. I had no idea why I got it. I have no family history either, and I got a very big family. So I have no family history on my mom's side that has, three sisters and a brother, and my dad's side had three brothers and a sister. They had no heart attacks and no issues, right? So I was like, okay, I'm taking these drugs. It gave me like Lipitor, 40 milligrams of that, and then off I went. and I was like, okay, and that's it. And I moved on, but I was still had questions in my mind of what was going on. Um, and then the whole other process started, which, which is the side effects of the drugs. I started to lose my memory. I literally started to lose my memory. I mean, I was 52 at the time, and I just started forgetting things. Like really, I was just crazy. I mean, I would just forget basic things. And I went back to the doctor and I was like, look, there's something with these drugs, but I'm losing my memory. I don't feel very good. And he switched to Crestor. And then the same issues were happening with that. So I started having really bad side effects with the drugs. I went off the beta blocker because that was making me so tired. And I mean, my heart rate, everything was not feeling good on that. So I got off that. But the statin drugs, I went through like two of them. Then he said, look, why don't you try Repatha? And by the way, my cholesterol wasn't that high. At the time that I had my event, my LDL was like 120 or 115. So I tracked my blood tests a lot because I had that candida issue. And I got my blood test all the way back. My LDL was like a 110, 115. It was never that high. And even my triglycerides, they were fairly high, maybe 100, 110 sometimes, 120, 80. My HDL was low. I had low HDL, but none of that even made sense to me. I just knew cholesterol was bad and my LDL wasn't that bad. So I started to really question this hypothesis that cholesterol did this to me. So anyway, I told the doctor finally, look, I can't take these drugs. I mean, my cholesterol got to like 40. He made my LDL like 40, and he was happy. He's like, man, you're amazing. Your LDL is 40. I'm like, I was feeling horrendous. I just had no energy. I was just depressed, major depression. And I remember I actually sat on the same couch I'm sitting on, And my daughter, my oldest daughter, said to me, "Dad, you've changed. You're not the same person anymore." And she said this to me, and that was a turning point for me because I just decided at that point I needed to find what was going on with myself, and I actually took ownership. And my doctor was very angry at me because he saw my LDL went straight back to like 120, and he called me up. I remember he called me up and said, "Mark, you're going to have a heart attack next week if you don't get on the drug." And I'm like, "Look, I'm not taking this drug anymore." I said, "I'm going to figure out what's going on with me," and I made a choice.
Mhm.
Um, which is not easy to do, to fire your cardiologist and try and find out why you have what you had. So anyway, I started reading. I got my memory back, by the way, in about a week. In a week, everything started coming back, and I just started to engulf books. I read about 20 books over about 3 months. I mean, I read everything under the sun. I read William Davis. I read Stephen Sinatra's book, Two Heart Disease Doctors. I picked up anything I could read on the natural way to heal your heart. And so that's what I did. I went online, I joined forums, I joined Facebook groups there. That's where we met. And I
Mhm.
just try to figure out that there's got to be another way, an alternative way to figure this out without drugs. And that's what I did.
Wow. Wow. It's some story. Um, well, just, there's plenty of data out there to suggest that, statins are beneficial for heart disease, especially post-event. So all of the guidelines tell, the clinicians to prescribe statins post any sort of cardiac event, cardiac or even a cerebrovascular event, like a stroke, essentially.
Mm.
But in your case, you were very symptomatic with that medication, so it became a quality of life issue, right?
Yeah.
It, your quality of life went down because you were having less memory. You're having memory problems. You were feeling depressed. Some people get like muscle aches with
Hmm.
statins, and we always have to remember in healthcare and in our own lives, we have to balance risk with quality of life, right? If my life is miserable and I live an additional 5 years, is it better than not having that 5 years but feeling great up till that point?
Hmm.
And that's something we all have to decide for ourselves. But it's something that I think a lot of doctors also don't talk to their patients about, right? If I'm putting you on a medication, then, here are some of the side effects. If you're having side effects, let me know. We can try different avenues, or, if you decide to go off the medication, that is your choice. You're accepting the risk. And I think a lot of, doctors and clinicians get kind of offended when a patient decides they don't want to take a medication. Um,
Yeah. He
and
was
it,
offended. My husband was offended, and you know what happened? I started reading studies. I read the Jupiter trial, which was a trial on HSCRP, an inflammation marker, and statins, and it showed that people that took the statin and had high inflammation benefited. And I started to read these studies and I started to present them to the doctor. And I said, "Hey, what about this Jupiter trial? It kind of showed that inflammation was a key marker." And I said, "Well, what about, this other study? And, that diabetes has a high risk factor on all." And he started to actually be very defensive. He was just like, "Look, Mark, there's been so much data and, the data's out there and everyone takes them." And he literally became very defensive once I started to understand everything and go into really detail. So at that point, I just decided, I needed to find a different path and find a different doctor. And then that's
yeah,
when I found actually Stephen Sinatra. I literally called him up. He was actually not practicing anymore. I read all his books. And he actually took my call. It took a 30-minute call with me because he really cared. And I really take my hat off to Stephen because he didn't have to speak to me. I spoke to his secretary and he was like, "Look, I'll speak to Steve," because I was concerned. I didn't know what to do. I had a high LP little a marker and I was concerned because I'd read enough now where I wanted to help myself. And he said, "I'll speak to you." Anyway, I got on the call with him and he says, "Mark, don't worry. I've seen many patients like you that have gotten through this where they took care of their insulin resistance and whatever. And he made me feel so comfortable that a doctor really understood me. I mean, for me, it was like, wow, I found someone that actually listened to me, wasn't going to fight me to take the drug and get to the bottom of what happened to me. And it wasn't him that helped me; it was his partner, Dr. James Roberts, who also co-wrote the book. He was practicing, and he was in Ohio, and I did contact him, and he was available. I basically signed up with him, and I was with him for about a year. And he got into the root cause of what happened to me. He started doing these other tests, particle count tests, cholesterol, you know, tests. He got into diabetes tests, all these different things, and he found out, a lot of things that my regular doctor did not find out. But he just gave me great comfort that someone was there to listen to me, to find a path that if I wasn't tolerating statins, that he was going to, still work with me. And that was the beginning for me. It was the beginning of really changing my whole way of thinking about heart disease, and it gave me hope. Um, and the other thing that I think gave me hope, Darius, was finding people on Facebook and groups that were going through the same thing. So what I want to do is reach out to as many people as I could that had gone through what I went through. And because it's very lonely. When you have heart disease, you have heart attack, it's a very lonely place to be, especially when you fire your doctor and you're on your own and you have three kids and you think you may die tomorrow. So for me, I wanted to just search online for people that have gone through what I went through and to give me hope. And I did. I found people like yourself. I found other people on these Facebook groups that had, high CT scores, calcium scores, that had gone through all these things. They were living. They were in their 80s. And I was like, wow, I saw a light at the end of the tunnel, that I could get through this, and that people have gotten through this. And that was the genesis of how it started this company. What we want to do is to give back. So, it's a long story of how we, what we're doing now with Health Quest and Health Truth. But that's the problem that I had. I didn't have anyone to help me. I was lonely. I didn't have people that I could find. And that's what we want to take care of now, and do that.
Wow. Wow.
Mhm.
So you said something in there that really stuck out to me, and you said it several times, like, "Oh, somebody who listened, somebody who listened."
Mhm.
It's There's so often doctors and clinicians that they just kind of dictate to their patients, "This is what you need to do. This is what you need to do," and the patient's like, "Wait, but how did this happen? Why am I here? What But no, no, no. You just needed to take these medications. This is the treatment you need. I got to see my next patient. Bye." And again, they get offended when you either have questions or you present something that challenges them a little bit, or you're hesitant to do whatever treatment they're suggesting. And they stop listening if they even listened at all to begin with. And you found somebody who listened to you, a clinician, provider, and then you also found people online who listened to you as well, and who you could listen to. So there's like a communication happening back and forth, and a commiseration to some degree. You know, it must be pretty scary firing your cardiologist right after you have a heart attack.
It's not
So
the normal thing to do. Yeah.
yeah. So just to be clear here, do you have any history of smoking
No,
and any high blood pressure?
no.
No. So okay. So you weren't obese. You were just slightly into the overweight category. Your LDL was actually in the what we consider normal range. I think they keep pushing it lower and lower and lower. But LDL of 110, 120 is totally within the normal range. In most cases nowadays, they still don't even treat that, especially if you're young and relatively healthy.
Mhm.
Um, because you weren't on statins at that time before the heart attack, correct?
No. Mm.
And were you on any medications?
No. Also, no medications.
So you were relatively healthy, just slightly overweight, didn't have any smoking history. You're not a drinker. Um, you are, your blood pressure was normal, your cholesterol was normal, but you had a heart attack. And from what I see in your labs too, I think your A1C was like 5.2.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
you were not diabetic or pre-diabetic per that lab test. Now there's some nuances to that maybe I can get into later, but um, for all intents and purposes, you were actually the picture of health. Just had a little tiny bit of excess weight that you could have lost. So you were saying that when you found the the provider that did a particle, did actually they did Quest's cardio IQ test on you.
Hmm.
And I see looking at it here that you had pattern B LDL, which means you had a greater preponderance of small particles, which we do know are tend to be more atherogenic. And in your case, your LDL, uh, your actually, yeah, your LDL-C at that time was only 64. So it was pretty low. And I believe at this point that was September of 2020. And when did you have your event?
Yeah, so I had my event September of 2020. So they put me on a statin straight away. So those tests that you're seeing there are actually when I was on the statin. And what's interesting is that statins
But
turn,
only for like a couple of weeks, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, no, no. So if you look at this, September 20th when I had my event. So what day is you looking there? It
So
must be
I'm looking at the cardio IQ test, and
yeah.
it was collected on September 22nd, 2020.
Yeah, so that's 12 days after I had my event. So I was on the statin, by the way,
Okay.
whatever. So what's interesting is my pattern B, it went from pattern A to pattern B when I was on a statin. And when I took the statin off, no more statin, it went back to pattern A.
Wow. So you had a cardio IQ test prior to this one?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I did have. Yeah, I had one prior because well, no, I know, I went off the statin and then it went back to pattern A. So
Okay.
I did the test on the statin and it was pattern B. I went off the statin and I went to pattern A, and that also kind of was like, whoa. So I've got fluffy particles without a statin, and then it's pattern B, with a statin. And you can read the research. That's what happens. Is that
Yeah.
basically left with basically pattern B particles in your blood?
Yeah, that was that does show up in studies that when you do start in a statin, it actually does change the ratio of your small to large particles. It reduces the amount
Yeah.
of large particles, so you have a higher ratio of small LDL particles, but the overall particle count is lower. So that's
Yeah.
the argument from this, people who were proponents of statins and lower LDL would say, well, your overall particle count is lower, so you're at a lower risk, therefore you're at a lower risk.
Yeah.
I do see that your LP little a is or lipoprotein A is at 224 nanomoles per liter. So that's actually pretty high.
Yeah, and that was on the statin.
Mhm.
So, and I know statins do raise LP little a because when I went off the statin, it came down. So that's another kind of interesting statistic that happened with me. And you can see it bounced around a lot. And I tried so many things on LP little a. Um, but I did realize on statins, my LP little a went up.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I see you were pattern. I'm looking at your LDL pattern. It stayed pattern B for quite a while.
Hmm.
It looks like it was pattern B up till February of 22, and then in May of 22, it finally flipped over to pattern A. Is that after that sometime after you went off to statin?
Yeah, well, I was on the statin for quite a long time because I was on the statin from I think September when I had the event all the way to the following year, maybe for like I was on the statin for about 5 months. So it wasn't immediately, it was 5 months. So I think I got off the statin, I think mid of 2021. That's when I got off it.
Okay.
I don't know, yeah, that's what happened.
And then so it looked like it stayed pattern B up to the next 6 months or something, and then it finally
Mhm.
flipped over that next year. So I don't wanna get too deep in the weeds here, but, what we're talking about is pattern A LDL versus pattern B. This is talking about the size of the LDL particles. Basically, the smaller the size of your LDL particles, the more atherogenic they are. So if you're pattern B, it means you have a higher preponderance of small, more atherogenic LDL particles versus pattern A, which means you have larger, less atherogenic LDL particles. Um, so during that time, you were taking the statins, you were still feeling awful, but you were starting to do some of your own investigation.
Yeah.
Um, and you were exposed to other people like Dr. William Davis and others that you, I'm sure, read in all
Yeah.
your different books.
Yeah, Philip
Um,
Avadia. I mean, Philip really was a big help for me. He's obviously the co-founder of the company. And I started just, get involved with a lot of doctors, read their books and, watch their YouTube channels. And I started to really kind of, get deep into this kind of, root cause of why me, right? So
wow. So what did you start doing? at this point?
Right.
Like,
So
say you're the statins, you're done with the statins, you're feeling awful with those,
mm,
and you are like, I need a different way forward. What
yeah,
did
no,
you start implementing in your own life?
right. So I think things started really coming together when I realized that the food that I was eating wasn't the right type of food. As I got more into deeper dive into, and it's not like my A1C was super high, but I was eating a lot of bread, a lot of juices, a lot of fruit, and I connected the two, that these sugary foods were causing the weight gain for one. It caused my candida because it was feeding the yeast. And then I started reading about the impact of diabetes or insulin resistance with, these high carbs that I was eating and consuming. And the doctors were telling me, look, this is a major driver, insulin resistance or pre-diabetes with heart disease. So I started changing my diet, and I really got very disciplined on no more bread, no more grains, no more fruit juices, which I ate, which I drank so much of. And I pivoted, and the weight started to come down. And that was the biggest impact. I didn't realize I was still not, my thyroid wasn't right. I mean, my TSH was like 4. It wasn't fixed.
At one
And
point, your TSH was 8.
correct.
I
And
noticed.
and my one naturopathic doctor had given me these natural supplements for my thyroid, and it never really corrected it. So I think in 2008, I never really corrected my thyroid. And I went into a deep dive on thyroid. I read a lot of stuff about it, and I finally did correct it. I went on Armour Thyroid. I went on 2 grains, which is about 125, I think it's milligrams, and it sorted out. I felt amazing. I mean, once I got my thyroid corrected, my TSH went back to normal. Felt amazing energy. So, I look at my root cause of what happened to me. I think it's, I got to do all these kind of deep dives, reading a lot. I think thyroid was a big one for me. I think the carbohydrates and sugar and all that, fruit juices, I think was a lot. I think stress, doing like 3 or 4 startup companies, young kids, I think stress was a big one. And I think seed oils. When I look back at the amount of, like chips and these like salt and vinegar, and I looked at the amount of seed oils that I was eating and consuming on airplane food to Dubai and all the stuff that I was consuming, I had a lot of seed oils. And I, because I look at like why me? It wasn't cholesterol. I had a high LP little a. It's not causing the disease, but there was something was happening in my body that wasn't balanced. And when I look back today, it's been 5 years, and I feel like a different person. I feel tremendous energy. I'm playing tennis like I did when I was in college. I fixed those things. I fixed those root cause things that I've read and researched, which I think it's, insulin resistance, thyroid's a big one for me, stress was a big one, and seed oils. I think, um, those are things that I corrected over that time. And if you look at my numbers, I just did my numbers the other day. My LDL is actually high. It's like 180. I'm not really worried about that. But everything else is pretty good. My inflammation came down. I did have a higher HSCRP and homocysteine. It's back to like, normal levels, relatively normal levels. So my inflammation came down. Um, so anyway, that was my journey. It was nothing I ever knew when I had my event. It's things that I had to research, read books, go on YouTube, go and find people to tell me this. It wasn't accessible to everyone. And it's even today, it's not. It's very hard to get out of this matrix and the way that how we treat if we have an event or we have a medical emergency to find an alternative way. It's frowned upon. And it's in the murky areas of YouTube and X where you find these people that are really helping, so many millions that don't have that information that we want to make more accessible, right? And that's what I think is happening today. I think with hopefully with the new kind of FDA and the new, the head of the HHS and, making these things available because I think patients are blinded and they have no help. Um, yeah.
So you had to basically be your own investigator, your own doctor in a way. Unfortunately, you're not a doctor, so you don't know all the information. You don't have the medical background, and you're scouring the web and it takes you months and years to find bits and pieces of info that help you with your own health. And everybody has to realize that each of us is an individual, and what works for one person might not work for another person, or it might work. You don't really know until you experiment on yourself and you get the lab tests to back it up and you see how you're feeling, you see if you're losing weight, you see if your symptoms are resolving. And it can take a long, long time if you don't have help. But when you do have help, when you have someone like a health coach or resources at your fingertips that can point you in the right direction rather quickly, you can start the experimentation on yourself and figure it out much easier than you would if you were just purely scouring the web and checking out different different Facebook groups and different websites, and asking AI and this question or that. When you actually have someone who gives you guidance, then the chances of you figuring out your health and improving it are just much, much better. And that's why we actually are working on a platform to be able to do that. And we're calling it what, Mark?
Yeah, so we're building a platform called Health Truth .ai, and we have a medical group called Health Quest. So what we want to do, it's exactly what I had problems with. So I wish I had 5 years ago a platform where I can go into Google and say I had an event, I don't want to take drugs. What do I do? And that's going to be healthtruth.ai. It will be like the alternative to Dr. Google, where you can go in there, put your information in, and get help. And the platform is about getting doctors that know what the root cause is and giving you help, because it's not something that AI is just going to solve. And people are not going to fire all their doctors. You're never going to do that. I mean, I'm in the financial service industry, and financial advisors, people use them because they trust them to provide investment advice, and no one's firing all their investment advisors. So what we're doing is we're building a platform where you can go on Health Truth AI, you can put your issue in, and it'll give you all these solutions with a medical platform to back it up. So our goal is to tie AI with medical and build a network of doctors around the world with telemed services that you can put your issue in, find answers of what's going on in a protocol to actually get healthy. You can do that in 5 minutes, where it took me a year, and it took a lot of courage to fire my cardiologist. So I didn't want to have that happen to anyone. And I was actually the patient that went through the system. So we built something that I think is very patient centric. It's for people that are looking for help to get to the root cause of anything, whether it's heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and getting the truth, which is very hard even on Google, because if you put in heart disease, you're going to get all these statin ads, or you know these Cleveland Clinic or Mayo Clinic, go there and do the traditional kind of medicine. And I think that's the issue we have today. So our goal is to be able to be unbiased, to put your information in an engine and to say, this is what's going on. Here's some help. Here's the protocols. And so we want to use technology and human to come together to provide these types of services for people that are not getting better, want to lose weight, want to be no longer on diabetes medication. So it's still, if they need to be on drugs, they can be prescribed drugs by our doctors. But our goal is to wean them off the drugs to get them to a natural place of health. And look, my summary for me was I really believe that, I got myself into this mess, that I can get myself out of this mess, and that drugs were not going to solve my issue, because I realized that there was an imbalance in my system, right? And I still take Armour thyroid, which is a natural thyroid medication, and I'm grateful for that. It's not a synthetic, medication, but um, I think there's an alternative way where we could, eat the right foods, have the right exercise, reduce your stress, sleep well. And I think humans are meant to be in balance. And I really believed that at my core, that I could get healthy. So luckily I had Darius. You also helped me a lot. People like yourself and a lot of people that have gone through this journey gave me confidence to actually, to heal myself, and then gave me the inspiration to build a platform globally that we want to help millions and millions of people at super low cost, and also free. I mean, we want to be doing things for free, giving back this information, and that's what we want to do.
Wow.
Mm.
Um, I do want to say that we don't want to replace the conventional healthcare system. I think we want people to keep the doctors that they do have and do like. And obviously there's many, many, many things that we need those doctors for. Health Quest can be an adjunct to that. It can be an add-on. You have a doctor who's prescribing you blood pressure medications because your blood pressure is, averaging 170 over 110. We can work with that doctor in helping get your blood pressure lower through natural means, and that doctor then can be responsible for weaning you off the medications. You don't necessarily need to use a health quest doctor. If you like the doctor that you have, you can use one of our health coaches, you can use the other resources that we give, but as long as you're informing your doctor of what you're doing. Because one thing I do need to caution is if you are making lifestyle changes, things like blood pressure medications, blood sugar medications, can cause you to drop your blood pressure or blood sugar really fast. So you obviously want to talk to your doctor about any changes that you are making. And the other thing I would like to say is that we tend to harp a little bit on big pharma and big healthcare in our nutrition space. And as somebody who works in healthcare, I would like to say that, you know, medications do save lives. Many, many times in the ER, I'm using medication. I'm using antibiotics to save a patient who's septic. We're using pressors to save a patient who is, septic and hypotensive. We're using medications to help get people's hearts started again if they're in cardiac arrest. There's a lot of wonderful, wonderful things that these medications do for people. That being said, if you have a chronic disease, the medications generally are not going to fix that. What you do, your nutrition, your exercise, your sleep routine, reducing stress, possibly supplementing a little bit, losing weight, those things are going to help you. And what we want to do is help people over the long term, right? If you're having chest pain right now, if you're having loss control of one of your arms, go to the hospital. Call 911, go to the ER immediately. You're having a stroke or a heart attack. That's where they can help you. What we want to help people with are the long-term chronic conditions that are degrading their quality of life and really making it tough for them every single day. We want to improve their lives and maybe improve their longevity as well. But mostly we want to help people be happier and be much more functional, enjoy the time with their family, enjoy, going places and doing things. Um, so that's why I really think it's important that we emphasize our whole goal is to improve the health of the individual in a way that works for them. And it's not to just completely shun the conventional medicine model because there's plenty of reasons that we need that model.
Yeah, 100%, Darius. I think it's a very important point. So, we built Health Truth and Health Quest around almost like a co-pilot working with the doctors around the world. There's some groups that are really want to disintermediate and say, look, the doctors are not doing a good job and, we're going to do it through blood testing and AI. And, we don't really believe that. So we think that we want to go with all the GPs out there that have their patients to help them as a co-pilot. When you're done with your physical, you got 364 days. What do you do? So Health Truth will be able to track these individuals, track what they're eating, tie their wearable information, and provide all those resources that the patient's not getting while they're not at the doctor. And I asked my doctor, my regular GP, once, when I had my issues, and it was a year later, and I came to see her, and she was like, Mark, I wish every patient was like you. Had all my blood tests, I was organized, and she said, you make my job easier. And that was the kernel of an idea for me because I realized that you don't want to file these doctors. You want to help them. They're overworked, overburdened. And I realized if we can build something to work with the doctor when you're not seeing them 364 days and you come to them every year and you're healthy, you've lost weight and you're energetic, you're working with them. And that's really what we want to do. We want to basically be the platform to work with all the GPs around the world. You can go online on GPT, you'll find us. You'll find us on the web. And then we'll be working with those GPs and getting the patients healthy when they're not seeing them. And I think chronic disease, like you said, it's no drug is going to solve, you know, diabetes. It's a lot of it's a food-borne illness. It's, you know, people use that word, but it's true. I mean, I think, you know, I was eating my way to not being well, and I think we need that time when we're not seeing the doctor. What do we do? There's carb addiction, there's food addiction. How do we manage that when we're not seeing the doctor? And I think that's the hardest part. So what we want to do is get to the root of disease, which is not drug related. It's like what's caused your disease. And that's what really Health Truth and Health Quest is all about. We're not funded by any pharmaceutical or drug companies or, you know, we're unbiased. We want to get to the root cause and everyone's different. I did my genetic test and I have certain genes, you know, and if I'd known my genetic test when I was 2 years old, it told me, you know, I had these 4 SNPs and it said, look, I would have been better on a low carb diet. I was prone to inflammation in my arteries and had all these different SNPs. I wish I had that information. So that's what we will do. We'll give people information and what do you do with that information? What type of diet would you need to eat if you had those types of genetics? So that's what we want to do. Work with the doctors that they don't have the time in 15 minutes once a year to do that when they see me. They just kind of do their physical exam, see what, you know, my numbers are, and we want to be that kind of aid to work with them.
Wow. That's actually I have a very um relevant story to that actually. So my wife right now, excuse me, I'll have to cut that part out. So I actually have a really good, let me drink some tea real quick. So I actually have a very relevant story regarding that. I hate when that happens.
Oh, no. Okay.
Oh,
No, but I'm going to add something while you're drinking your tea. I think genetic testing, and I think a lot's been said about in the, you know, and it's, you know, how do we change our genes and, you know, what control do we have? And do I even want to know my genes? Because what can I do about them? I was always on the fence with that. But now that I've done my genetic test and my kids, you know, I've also got them to do their ApoE test, you know, there's lots of genetic tests your kids can do. I'm a firm believer now. The reason why is AI. I think what AI is going to do, it's going to triangulate all this information, genetics, blood tests, your sleep data from your Oura Ring, your Apple Watch. It takes all that data, and you'll see what we got the beta version of Health Truth. It gave me insight. So it did know that I had my 9p21 gene, which is, you know, some heart disease gene. I had APO34 gene. I had a few of these genes. But what the AI told me, it says, look, you can mitigate all this stuff based on all the research in the planet by doing these certain things because they've got the data. So it was able to take all that data, which doctors can't do. They can't take genetics, blood tests, and everything for me. And I think that's what's going to revolutionize healthcare. It's not making it more efficient. It's actually taking everyone's data and treating everyone as an individual N of one, but actually giving them kind of precision advice. And you'll see with Health Truth, that's what it's going to do. It's going to give you your meal plan. It's going to tell you what vitamins to take. It's going to say, look, you're prone to this, you're prone to that. And I think that's going to be the game changer to get people healthy, to get medical costs to go down, people to be less sick. Now, clearly, you have addiction, you know, and addiction is a whole nother story. How do you stop eating carbs and how do you stop eating these sugary foods? And, you know, that's another kind of strategy of how do we do that. But I think getting to the root cause of the issues that you have is going to be known. And I think that's what we're going to do at Health Truth and Health Quest.
Yeah, um, it's it's great that you say that because there's a lot of information that we can give to people and be like, "Hey, this is what would be great for you." Now there's a question of implementation, and that's where someone like a health coach comes in.
Mm.
And the reality is we can have all the best technology, AI, web-based platforms in the world, but helping that person in their individual life with all of the challenges that they have really requires a human touch. It
Yeah.
requires that a health coach is working with them and helping to guide them, you know, looking for less expensive alternatives to maybe supplements or food or what resources there are in that subject's area. Um, You said something a little bit ago also about how doctors don't have time, and they have what 15 minutes with us, right? And that's to go over all your lab results, get in there, wash your hands, say all the pleasantries, um, and 15 minutes is not enough, frankly, right? It's really not enough. You and I went over this big long history, and it's taken us an hour, and I actually reminds me of a really relevant story. I took my wife in for her 28-week pregnancy appointment. We're due in August, and she had went and done the oral glucose tolerance test. And if people who don't know, they got to drink this like 100-gram glucose drink, sit there for an hour, and get their um, blood sugar checked at the end of it. So they get a blood draw after sitting there for an hour, and if it's over 140, then they go, okay, we should do a 3-hour test. So we went and did the test, and her glucose came back at 148. So just slightly above, like, it literally, if she would have just, like, they don't want you to walk, but if you'd have walked around for 5 minutes, it would have dropped it, well below that. And just to let you know, my wife is very, very thin, naturally, very lean, very fit and healthy. Even as a pregnant woman, she's still, like, lean and fit. Um, so when we went back into the, to see OB/GYN, they were saying that they wanted to do the 3-hour test, and I'm like, frankly, I don't want my wife eats very healthy. I don't wanna blast our baby with another 100-gram glucose drink. And so I told her, like, "Hey, I'm a nurse," and this is actually at the hospital that I work at. Said, "I'm a nurse, I have some extra continuous glucose monitors. How about I just put one of those on her and monitor her glucose during that time?" And the OBGYN's like, "Oh, well, that's great. Actually, we have a protocol for that." And I'm like, "Wait, what? You do?" She goes, "Oh, yeah. So if you just put that on her, and then all I just need 5 days of data, and showing your meals." And I'm like, "Well, why don't we just do this normally? Why do we give someone this drink and put them, make them wait in the lab and blast them with all this sugar?" And she goes, "Well, it's just we don't have enough time to teach people."
Yeah.
So they don't do the thing that would actually be much more relevant to somebody's life, right? The putting someone on a continuous glucose monitor for 2 weeks would actually see what's going on in that individual's life.
Mm.
But because teaching it, which honestly doesn't take that long, you can teach somebody how to use it in, 5-10 minutes, really.
Mm.
But they don't have that much time because there's other things they have to get through within that appointment, within that 15 minutes. So the
Mhm.
reason that they don't use CGM and opt for the oral glucose tolerance test, even though the CGM is a better measure, is purely because they don't have time. We want to provide that time to people. We want to be the person who listens and educates. And that's really what is missing in healthcare, is somebody who listens, has the time to listen to the patient and to educate them. And that's what we want to do.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I have a CGM on my arm. I have it over here. I have my Aura ring. So I'm very conscious of what I'm eating, or how I'm sleeping, exercise. So, and people say, well, you're unusual, you like the 0.001%. But I really think once this becomes more mainstream, where people have these tools, are educated by their doctors, and make it affordable, where insurance can cover these things, I think it's going to become more mainstream. And we need the doctors to push this out, because they're the front line with the patients. They're like trusted people for them. So we want to work with those doctors, have those doctors educate the patients. And that's what needs to change in the medical system, because there's just so many mixed incentives that the doctors may have, because the way they have their algorithms and the way they practice medicine, where they only have 15 minutes of time. As you said, Darius, it takes an hour, like to actually get to know someone and to understand what they're going through. And that's where we want to try bridge that gap, because, will the doctors, change us to a new paradigm, straight away? It's going to take them time. And we just want to be out there to be able to educate people, to tell them that there are other options where you can work with your doctor. Um, and that's what we want to do. We want to give back, pay it forward, and so it's exciting time right now. I think in this time around the world, I think with the change, in the health and human services division, I think that they're very pro preventative health, getting better, and not just, giving out medication. So I think we couldn't have launched this company 5 years ago. We needed the time now to actually do that, where people in the government will be supporting us, and it's a very exciting time, and hopefully my kids will grow up and look, they're very knowledgeable just from watching me and living with me the last 5 years. So we eat a lot of meat in the house, and my son is like, a carnivore, and I'm not telling him to do that. He just saw the change in me. And I think the parents have the greatest influence over the kids. I think the family units and the mother and the father, how they eat, affects the children. And I think, we have that responsibility for our children, the next generation. And all these kids that are obese or have diabetes at a young age, it's really so sad. And so I've been a kind of a mentor to my kids just through what I went through. And we want to give that to other people and other parents to be able to do that for their children.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great, Mark. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I just wanted to say one thing is that you know, I made it through, and not many people would have done what I did, which is really go out on your own and at risk of a heart attack tomorrow with your cholesterol. And I want to just be able to give back and give people that chance to do that and give them the tools to walk across that Grand Canyon without ropes, and we'll be there for them because it's not easy to take the route that I took. And I think you can do that. You can actually do it, and you can be your own best advocate. So I want to just let everyone know you have help. We're here, and other groups are also helping people. And I want to, thank you, Darius, for also being there on the journey for me, getting me through my journey. So I want to thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you for your time, Mark. So there you have it. That was my interview with former professional tennis player Mark Kaplan. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for making it all the way through this and to also say that this is not medical advice. I am not telling you to take or not take any medications. I advise you to always listen to your doctor and always communicate with your doctor. And more importantly, if you are having symptoms of any sort, chest pain, shortness of breath, funny feeling, pressure, palpitations, call 911 or go to the emergency department immediately. Okay. That's where you're going to get help. I know a lot of us in the nutrition and low carb community eschew um, conventional medicine, but believe me, I work in conventional medicine. If you're having an emergency, that is really what we do well at. So go to the ER or call 911 if you feel like you're having an emergency. That being said, have a great June.